Afternoon, I would like to call the meeting of the Audit Committee to order, please. Michelle, are there any public speakers?
Yes, Madam Chair. We have two public speakers today. The first is Jason Anthony, followed by Michael. As a reminder, we ask that all public speakers adhere to the MTA's rules of conduct and decorum. I would also like to remind the public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware that there will be a warning beep to remind you that you have 30 seconds to conclude your remarks.
Jamie? Oh, can you hear me well? Okay. So this month we want to address some issues that other agencies are not doing that is auditing the money. And I'm gonna mention the agency flat out loud. It's the Port Authority. And what we're doing is auditing when they disclose their financial report, it's not audited. I wonder why. But us, we have to keep auditing whatever we spend because we don't want to get to 2026 and be in another fiscal cliff. That's plain simple. Because already people are raising, I'll say, hell regarding the announced fare and toll increase in the finance committee. So let's assume if a person doesn't pay the fare or pay the toll, all that money will be passed to the commuters like myself that pay while using the service. So let's keep doing the good work in the audit committee. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday morning.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Michael, remote.
Good afternoon, everybody. First things first, I want to discuss more about the fare and toll increase. First of all, all this is going to do is cause more fare evasions than what we already have. Second, the more people that jump the turnstiles, the more money that we're going to be paying, and that is not going to be good. And my other concern is, of course, the Brooklyn bus redesign. That being, there are a couple things that can be improved on the Brooklyn bus redesign, such as sending the B35 to JFK. The other thing I want to talk more about is rear door boarding and Omni cards for students for the upcoming school year. Why is that not a thing? And I'm really hoping that one of these days for the next academic year, we can get Omni cards for students, which is a very important step in the right direction. And of course, I understand why you're scared to do rear door boarding because of fare evasion, but there has to be more to it. I think one thing we should do is hire matrons that do the school buses, hire them, and we can get them in for crowd control. And this is something that can be done. And I want to conclude it here. People who surf the subways, the first surf the subway and the ride could be your last. That's what I could say about it. And it's not a game. It's deadly. So please, I urge the MTA to please enforce subway surfing cops around somewhere, because what ends up happening is that people lose their lives doing that dangerous stunt. So please enforce them in one of the most hotspot areas, like by the Williamsburg Bridge and all along the 7 line. So please, thank you so much and have a great day.
Madam Chair, this concludes the public speakers.
Thank you to our public speakers for your comments today. Next, we will have the approval of the Audit Committee minutes. As there was not a quorum at the last Audit Committee meeting, we will be voting to accept the minutes from the October 24, 2022 meeting, as well as the minutes from the February 21st, 2023 meeting. Any corrections or changes to the minutes? May I please have a motion to approve the October and February minutes? A second? All in favor? The minutes are approved. Michelle, are there any changes to the work plan?
No, Madam Chair, there are no changes to the work plan.
Okay, thank you. We now have Jim McGovern from the MTA Acting Deputy Chief from the Comptroller's Office, who will brief the committee on management's review of the 2022 MTA consolidated financial statements. This review includes changes in capital, net assets, other assets, and operating revenues and expenses. Jim?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Just quickly, want to give you a heads up that the presentation here is not in accordance with GAAP, as my colleagues will probably attend to, but it's condensed.
Okay.
Just so we're aware of that. One thing I want to do, I added this year a slide for the component units. We added a new component unit, number 10, at the bottom, called GMOC, or MTA Grand Central Madison Concourse Operating Company. I guess all I wanted to say for that is, of these 10 entities, 8 of them have their own separate audit reports. Therefore, they have their own separate levels of materiality and testing. So that just, as we add more component units, we add more cost to support that. All right, just for everyone's. The consolidated financial statements, these are our, every year, these are the standard reports that we issue for each agency within each one of the audit reports. I just need you to focus on the middle row there, GASB 87, okay? If you leave here today, I want you to leave here with the thought of how significant the implementation of this GASB was, okay? And let me move on to the next chart on that. So if you look at this chart right here, that basically shows us that we had to restate 21, okay? And just to refresh everyone's mind on GASB 87, GASB 87 is about leases and basically provides financial statement users with improved accounting and financial reporting for leases. Under this statement, a lessee is required to recognize a lease liability and an intangible right-to-use lease asset, and a lessor is required to recognize a lease receivable and deferred inflow of resources. Key to what I want to show you here is the middle column, which was the GASB 87 impact. In summary, what this is saying is that we, MTA Consolidated, added $1 billion of assets and $1 billion of liabilities to our balance sheet. And then if you look towards the bottom, you'll see that the income and expense changes, the net difference was relatively small, okay? This is pretty consistent with universally how this accounting pronouncement has been implemented, but I don't think $1 billion reflects the amount of effort that went into this. And I just want to repeat myself, before you leave here, you should recognize the effort that went into this. So how did we get to this? What this $1 billion represents is about 1,200 leases. Each one of them needs to have its own individual calculation of the net present value of cash flows, plus pluses and minuses, depending if you're a lessor or a lessee. But the 1,200 leases really represent only a piece of it. We actually went through and we had to review over 5,000 leases and evaluate them, and subject all to audit. I think the audit team said they selected how many?
400.
About 400 leases were selected for testing this year because of the significance of this pronouncement. So how did we implement it? We had to implement a new software package. We leveraged our Yardi software package with MTA Real Estate. We created 2 new processes, one in procurement to identify new leases that are coming through the system. So the accounting department now reviews all the requisitions for leases, and we also are now part of the process to approve the requisition of leases. We added about 60 brand-new general ledger accounts to keep track of all these right-of-use assets, deferred liabilities, accounts receivables, and deferred inflows. The difference between the public I'll call it the private world and the government world, is that the government world is also required to account for the receivable side, which sort of just doubles the level of effort. Okay? So how many meetings we had? We had meetings, and I would say we had meetings and we had meetings. And we're still having meetings. I think the difference also, one more thing I want to point out to you, historically, when we've implemented accounting pronouncements, it's only been a small group of departments involved. Usually, it was the actuary and the legal department maybe, and then the accounting department. So with this implementation, we had procurement, we had MTA real estate, we had MTA IT, we had the operating units, we had MTA legal, we had internal audit, and we also had several meetings over the summer with Deloitte, our colleagues from Deloitte, to go over our interpretation of the GASB, whether we were implemented properly, just giving us some guidance to go by. So I don't have enough time to say thank you for all the people that helped. I just want to say, and she's not here because she's working on GASB 87 meeting right now, I want to point out thank you to Lisa Tan, who's been our point person and kept this together, not just for MTA Consolidated, but also with our audit folks here. So kudos to Lisa if you're listening. So that's really within time constraints, how I want to talk to you about GASB 87. The rest is sort of the standard assets and liability report. Right now, at the end of 22, preliminarily, we have $116 billion, $117 billion of assets versus $113 billion in prior year. On the change in the assets year to year, the biggest differences is cash and investment, and that's primarily due to the receipt of funds for the ARPA grants. And receivable change is primarily due to the Carissa grants last year being accrued for as a receivable and received, and monies received in 22. I'm just being cognizant of the time. Very similar changes on the liability side. All basically last year we redeemed the MTA grant anticipation notes in 2022 that were on the books in 21, and the pension liabilities, and primarily due to changes in the asset value on NICERs from year to year. Nothing really significant. Nothing in addition to the $1 billion of assets and liabilities, if I mentioned that earlier about GASB 87. These charts here just pretty much, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it basically confirms what everyone thinks about assets and liabilities, transit being our substantial entity on the asset side, whereas on the liability side, the agency who holds the debt is MTA and TBTA, and that's why they're shown so highly in that box there. This chart just quickly just shows you the relative assets and liabilities, and small, on the capital asset side, you'll see a small little yellow sliver, which is the right of use assets, the GASB implementation. That kind of just basically tells you we did a lot of work for a small percentage of the assets at this moment, but the work that had to be done nonetheless. The final is the consolidated financial statements. The biggest significant story was the federal grant money that we received during the year, which caused primarily most of the change year to year. And the same could be said for the cash flows on the consolidated financial statements. This is just a listing of our footnotes. I don't want to, this is all, in every report of all those 8 audited reports, these footnotes are required. I think that's all I wanted to say in the time I have allotted, so if there are any questions, I'd be glad to handle them.
Well, thank you, Jim. I know it was a short amount of time. I just have one question. Thank you again for all the work, especially with the GASB. That sounded like a tremendous lift. Do you feel comfortable that the systems are improved to go forward now,
For,
especially for the GASB lift? Yeah.
you know, to say we haven't had a hiccup when we were going through this process wouldn't be true, because we don't have hiccups in any implementation. But I am comfortable that we are attending to all the issues. Actually, in speaking with my colleagues in Deloitte, you know, they've identified some differences. We're addressing those differences, so I am comfortable that we're
Okay.
addressing
No,
them.
it's a tremendous effort. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Jim? Okay, moving along. Okay, next we have Jill Strohmeyer and representatives of her team from Deloitte, the MTA's public accounting firm, to present the results of their review of the 2022 MTA consolidated year financial statements. The financial statements will be issued in final form after the audit committee review and approval. Jill Strohmeyer, Managing Director, will give the presentation. Jill?
Thank you. Just before I start, I just want to say thank you to Kevin, Jim, and Michelle's groups for assisting in this year's audit. As Jim mentioned, 8 audits going on at the same time is quite the undertaking, and just a big thank you to all of your teams. And then to my right is the Deloitte team that really does all the work. These guys are the superstars on the Deloitte side. Costas, Patricia, Anissa, and Darshan all play a really important role in what we do as your independent auditors. So Deloitte is in the process of completing your 2022 audits for the MTA and its agencies. We're conducting our audits in accordance with AICPA standards as well as government auditing standards. We expect to issue our reports next week. May 31st is our target date. As Jim mentioned, there was one change in accounting policies this year that relates to GASB Statement 87 and leases. We have evaluated the impact of GASB 87, the accounting practices, policies, and estimates used in determining the assets liabilities recorded as a result of this implementation. There were no uncorrected misstatements or disclosure items passed for this year's audits. We're also not aware of any material corrected misstatements that we brought to the attention of management throughout the performance of our audits. We have not had any disagreements with management. We've received the full cooperation of management throughout our audits. There was one item that I was made aware of, we were made aware of by management. So management did find an error this year during the process of their procedures. It relates to $355 million of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency revenue, that was previously recorded as a third-party liability, which was corrected this year and recorded as revenue. This was not material to the prior year financial statements or to the 22 financial statements. And I do want to point out, while this does relate to FEMA and a federal grant, this was correctly reported on all of your schedules that are reported up into the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So up to the federal awarding agencies, these amounts were correctly reported in the correct year. So this is just truly something that's being corrected in this GAAP set of financial statements this year. As a result of GASB Statement 87, in our auditor's opinions, we are going to include an emphasis of matter paragraph. This emphasis of matter paragraph is really just to alert the users of the financial statements that you implemented the lease standard and that there was a restatement of the 2021 balances as a result. It is still an unmodified opinion, so still a clean opinion across all of the 8 audits. And finally, next month, maybe it's July, I apologize, maybe it's at the July meeting, we will be bringing to this committee's attention some control deficiencies that we have identified throughout the course of our audits. Nothing of high severity, but just some better business practices and low-level deficiencies that we'll bring to your attention in July. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions as it relates to the performance of our audits.
Any questions? Thank you, Jill. Any questions? May I have a motion to accept the 2022 year-end financial statements and a recommendation to accept the financial statements and move them to the full board for their final approval on Wednesday? Thank you. A second? Thank you. All in favor? The MTA 2022 year-end financial statements are accepted by the Audit Committee and will be recommended to the full board for their approval on Wednesday. Now, continuing with Deloitte, we will have their review of the MTA's compliance with the guidelines governing investment practices. Jill?
So on page 666 of 672 in your package, you will see a one-page Deloitte report. This is a negative assurance report. It just means that in the performance of our annual audit of the MTA consolidated financial statements, we did test your investment balances, and nothing came to our attention during the testing of those account balances that would indicate that any of your investments are not in accordance with your own MTA investment guidelines or the guidelines set forth by the state of New York. And that concludes my
Great.
remarks on the investment compliance.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions? Okay, may I have a motion to accept the investment compliance report and move it to the board for final approval on Wednesday? Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor? The investment compliance report is approved. Moving on, we have Lamont Kearse, the Chief Compliance Officer. Lamont is here with the agency internal control officers to provide a quarterly report on the status of open and past due audit recommendations previously accepted by the agency. Is Lamont?
All right, thank you very much. So beginning on page 667 in your book, we have a presentation on the various situations in terms of the open recommendations. So there are currently 99 remediation plans which the departments have indicated they have implemented, but they are awaiting confirmation that they are in fact prepared to be closed. So let me explain a little bit of the process. When audit services issues a finding or when compliance does a test and that test fails, that generates a finding. As a result of that finding, compliance works with the department to create a remediation plan, and that's what in fact we are tracking right now, that actual remediation that's being done. This slide indicates what the departments have said they have done. However, that has to be confirmed by both audit services and compliance that in fact it is done and that there is sufficient documentation to support it in case that ever gets questioned. Currently, there are 84 remediation plans that are past due, of which at the time of this report, there were 20 that were high priority. As you can see from the slide, we do rank these things based upon priority, how significant they are, how impactful they will be. So out of that, there are 20 at the time this report went in the book that were high priority. I'm actually very happy to say as of today, there are now only 13. So we have closed quite a few in the last 2 weeks. Especially I'd like to thank Lizette and Kevin for their support and having that meeting with me that helped move these things along. So thank you very much for that. This slide reflects those that are high priority based upon the department. As I said before, as you can see, that rather large blue line, which was IT, is now cut by 2/3. So again, thank you, Lizette and Raf. We were able to do a really good job closing those out. Just to give an idea of what we're talking about inflows and outflows, right? Because you think about this in terms of, oh, wow, if these things are past due, but you have to understand the context. So last quarter, not this quarter, but last quarter, there were 102 new remediation plans created in that quarter alone. In that quarter, 125 remediation plans were closed. So this is a very large ongoing process, but the departments are working on, opening these up, correcting the issues, and closing them out. So I just wanted to make sure that that concept of the 84, the 20 that I mentioned, didn't get lost in the significant amount of work that's being done by everyone. So that's my presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Lamont. Any questions? Yes? Lisa, go ahead.
So I appreciate, those numbers sound scary.
I'm sorry.
Is there a timeline of when you get it to the remediation point, or is it an ongoing? Because you started your presentation saying that things needed to be confirmed, that the backups were in place. What's the timelines?
So the process changed a little bit, so I'll kind of give you a little context, and I'm concerned about the time, but I'll keep it brief, which is hard for me. So, well, compliance was asked several years ago to monitor, right? And that's what we were doing. We had Excel spreadsheets, et cetera. About 2018, we put a system in place. And as part of that system, Michelle and I met, and we made some changes to how these things were being done. So when these findings are generated, there is a time put in place at that point when the departments, based upon the discussion with Michelle and her team, believes that they can actually implement that, right? Compliance comes in, this is I guess a really bad thing to say, but kind of like a watchdog at that point. So, we've got that date, we stick to the date, right? We don't modify it, we don't negotiate it. This is the date that we report to you, and that's what we stick to. So that date is how is negotiated at the beginning when the finding is actually generated.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we have one final topic for discussion. May I have a motion to convene an executive session to discuss proposed pending or current litigation in accordance with New York State Public Officers Law 105.1D? Second? All in favor? We will now move to executive session. Thanks. Thank you. guess, Sharif, you have more time. I'm rushing for you, Sharif.
You have everybody on pins and needles.
Executive session, the committee discussed items related to proposed pending or current litigation. This executive session was for informational purpose only, and no action is required by the committee. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? All in favor? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.